Hello, everyone. I'm Arvi Teikari, the developer of Baba Is You, and I will be talking to you about the development process of Baba.
Amazing. All right. Arvi, we can see your screen. We can see your presentation right now.
Yeah. So I think refreshing worked. Sorry about that, but yeah.
No problem. All right. We'll go on my mute. We'll let you take it away. Please
Okay.
take your time to speak. Don't worry about the deadline. Just go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right. So I'll just wait just a moment longer. So yeah, unfortunately, my face won't be on the screen, but that's okay because it will be just my coronavirus beard and stuff, and now you will actually see interesting information about the actual slides of my presentation. So, hello everyone. As I already mentioned, I guess I'll say it again. I'm Arvi Teikari, the developer of Baba Is You. I'm based in Helsinki, Finland. And this presentation will be about the development process of Baba Is You. And I will also explain what it is in case you haven't heard of it. I hope you can see the slides, even though there's some extra on the sides there. I'll try my best to make everything visible. So, in my presentation, I will be telling you, I will introduce myself a little bit more thoroughly. Then I will tell you what Baba Is You is, maybe a little bit why making Baba Is You has caused me to be here. Like, what is the reason why people want me to talk about Baba Is You? At least my own guess for that. And then I will go through the development process of Baba Is You to kind of, that's the topic of the presentation, obviously, but just kind of start from how I came up with the idea, what happened next, what is going on right now, and so on. And finally, I will kind of return to the topic of why Baba Is You has been interesting to people, because that is something. Baba Is You is maybe not the kind of game that most people would think about when they think about a successful video game. There are a couple of things in Baba Is You that make it maybe slightly, it's a very indie game, let's put it that way. So I will kind of explain some of my own lessons in what makes Baba Is You an interesting game, or at least what I think might be the reason why people like it. Anyway, so let's go to the actual presentation. So, who am I? As mentioned, I'm a Finnish game developer from Helsinki, Finland. Okay. And I've been doing game design since about 2002 or so. I've been interested in making games ever since kindergarten, actually, because when I was in kindergarten, many kids of my age had older siblings, brothers and sisters and so on, who played video games. Because at that point in the early 90s or mid 90s, I guess, Super Nintendo and other early game consoles were really big in Finland. At least I think so. So many kind of school-aged kids played them. And as a kindergartner, I was too young to play video games. Like, you need to be old enough to really understand how to play video games. So I just watched enviously as my brother played Super Mario World and really wished I could play it as well. And we actually had a thing in kindergarten where we drew our own games on paper, on our own levels, and asked our friends to quote unquote play them, so that they would kind of show with their finger where they are going the level and tell, like, just say out loud what they are trying to do. And there was actually kind of a funny thing where if your friend was playing a level, then they would probably beat everything correctly. There would be some kind of like, here's two buttons, which one do you press? And if they were your friend, they always press the right button. And if they were not your friend, they might always press the wrong button and just, monster appears, you die, that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I had kind of interest in game development even before primary school. But in, I think, 5th grade in primary school, a schoolmate introduced me to Game Maker, which was a really good find, because before that I had looked briefly into Quick Basic, but as a kid in primary school, especially when you don't really know English, actual programming is kind of a difficult thing to get into. So Game Maker was a really nice thing where it kind of showed me that, oh, there are tools for kids who don't know how to program. I made some games with my schoolmates and on my own with Game Maker, but with Game Maker, there is also the fact that Game Maker has its own scripting language, the GML. And learning that was still quite a big hurdle because I didn't really understand English and I didn't have the patience to learn something like that. So eventually I moved on to there's a company called Click Team, which makes game creation tools such as Click and Play and the Games Factory and Multimedia Fusion and Click Team Fusion. I moved on to their family of game development programs because those don't require any programming at all by default. And those were much better for me as a primary schooler. And that's where I ended up in. My interest has been very largely in kind of smaller experimental games, especially game jams have been very important for me. And I've released 2 commercial titles of my own, Environmental Station Alpha in 2015 and then Baba Is You in 2019. And as the final point on this slide, I hope the slides are actually visible right now. So I kind of want to underline the fact that I'm not really a programmer. I use game creation tools, and I've still managed to make commercially successful games. I want to kind of make that clear because I know that maybe not so much nowadays, but at some point there was definitely some kind of elitism in the game development community about kind of, are you using actual programming languages or are you using these children's toys like RPG Maker to make games? And I don't want to support that kind of viewpoint. So I've been making games without real programming basically my whole career. Anyway, on to the next topic. So what is Baba Is You? Baba Is You is a puzzle game that follows in the format of block pushing puzzle games popularized by Sokoban. Sokoban is a Japanese game. I think the name literally means warehouse keeper or just warehouse. And the idea in Sokoban is that you are moving on a grid. There's a top-down view. You control the warehouse keeper, and there are boxes of something. There are walls, and there are marked spots. And you have to fill every marked spot with a crate or box of things. You move in the grid, you push the boxes around, and that's literally all there is. You might have more boxes than marked spots, but still, as long as you fill every marked spot with a box, you win the level. It's a very simple concept, but it's been very well liked. And in the modern days of indie games, and even earlier, there have been a lot of games that kind of take this very simple, basic idea and add some kind of a twist to it. And I think the game Stephen Sausage Roll maybe kind of started a new renaissance of these block pushing puzzle games back in 2015 or so. There have been a lot of really good games in the genre since, such as Snakebird, A Good Snowman is Hard to Build, Stephen Lovell's Puzzle Script, which is a simple scripting language for making these kinds of games. Very recently, there was the game A Monster's Expedition in Puzzling Exhibitions released, which I've been playing the past couple of days, which is really good. Also games such as Pipe Push Paradise, and Hiding Spot, and soon to be out, or I don't know actually when it's going to be out, but Bonfire Peaks is a game that I've been looking forward to, and also Patrick's Parabox. After the talk, I can write these names in the chat, so if you want to check these games out, you can do that. But I've been really into these games. They speak to me on some level. I've been really enjoying what they offer. And I've been wanting to make my own puzzle game for a very long time, but I've often run into some kind of design problems with them. It's been surprisingly difficult to come up with a good puzzle game idea that actually supports a large puzzle game. So in Baba Is You, the twist is that you still push boxes around on a grid. It's top-down view technically, But among these pushable blocks, there are words, and you can make sentences with these words, usually 3-word sentences, such as Baba is you. And what these rules do is they change how the game works. Basically, most of everything that happens in the game is dictated by these rules. And by pushing these words around, you can actually change the rules of the game. And that's kind of the crux of the game mechanic of Baba is you. For example, the rule Baba is you means that Baba, this creature, I will show you a picture in just a moment, is controlled by you, the player. Or to use another example, you can say flag is win. And when you say that, flag, another object, is the win condition. If you touch something that is win, you win the level. There could also be something like rock is push. Rocks are pushable, just like in Sokoban, these boxes. Wall is stop. Walls are obstacles. You cannot move through them, and so on. There are a lot of different rules you can make. And the interesting thing is that you can change this. You can say flag is you, in which case flag becomes what you control, or wall is win, in which case if you touch wall, you win. There's a lot of kind of a possibility space, as they say. And as it says on the line here, almost nothing has meaning on its own. There are some things that are kind of hard-coded into the game. For example, that these words can be pushed around. But beyond that, the game is very kind of free-form. You have very many possibilities of changing things and altering what things mean. And one thing about Baba Is You that I will come back to later is that the puzzles are very insight-based. The Let's Player Alex Diener used this term, and I've really liked it. Basically, the idea is that in Sokoban, when you solve a puzzle, because there are so few kind of components to the puzzles, you can there's only so many ways you can have new insight into the puzzles. Very quickly, when you have seen the mechanics, you have kind of seen everything that the puzzle system can offer in terms of completely new, unique interactions. And then the increased difficulty in puzzles is more about increased complexity, more difficult, more complex, larger levels. But with insight-based puzzles, the puzzles are more built around unique interactions so that you can't just infer the point of the puzzle from what you have learned before, but you instead have to learn something completely new. And this is something that I find very exciting. I will explain in a moment why I find it exciting. And Baba Is You's puzzle design is very heavily based on this. You have to have these aha moments instead of kind of utilizing the stuff you already know to get into the solution by kind of process of elimination, so to say. There are some pros and cons to this, but I personally enjoy this kind of puzzle design. And I will get to the level editor later, so let's not dwell on that. So to explain the puzzle mechanic a little bit better so that you can actually get some diagrams and pictures, I'll use some pictures. Well, it's repeating myself, but whatever. So the creature in the middle of the screen right now that you can hopefully see. Right. So the creature right here is Baba. And you can see the rule, Baba is you. So these are the words that you can push around. And Baba can move around when you say Baba is you and push these words around. And a very simple example situation could be this, where we have Baba. Let's assume that Baba is you. The rule is written somewhere out of you. And then we have the rule, wall is stop. So these bluish gray walls are something you cannot move through or Baba cannot move through. And flag is win. So if Baba touches the flag, Baba wins the level. So right now, the walls are obstacles. Baba cannot get to the flag. But if we just break the rule, if we say that wall is no longer stop, wall is nothing, then wall becomes just a decoration. And that lets Baba get into this kind of yard of walls and touch the flag. Very simple, but wait, there's more. Another example would be this, where we again assume that Baba, the creature, is somewhere out of view. We have the same rules as in the previous example. Wall is stop, Baba is you, flag is win. Again, wall is kind of outside of the view. if we assume in this case that wall stop is kind of against a wall itself, so you can't easily just break the rule, what we can instead do is that we change who is you. We say that wall is you instead of Baba is you. So now all the walls are actually the playable character. We can move around with the walls. So just by pressing right twice, we can move this square of walls to the right and touch the flag and win the level. So that's kind of this. I will return into this topic as well a bit later, but this kind of changing how things work and making kind of familiar things do something completely unusual is something that is kind of interesting about the game. And at this point, right? Just a moment, I'll have to get myself a little glass of water because my throat is kind of running dry. There we go. Let's continue. Sorry about that. I should have prepared with a glass of water, but sometimes things get so exciting that you forget. Okay, I think this is an old slide. I should have removed this slide, but let's go to the development process, the actual topic of the talk. Although I feel that most people are kind of interested in also the design of Baba Is You. So even though the topic of the presentation is development of Baba Is You, I think it kind of makes sense to discuss also the design. My apologies if you were only interested in the development process. I'll try to keep on this topic for a little bit longer. So, as mentioned earlier, I have a huge interest in right. Can you see me, or can you see the screen?
Arvi, we can see you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mispressed. Sorry about that. Accidentally closed the presenting. So let's go on. Go ahead. So as I mentioned earlier, game jams are very close to my heart, and especially the Nordic Game Jam, which at least used to be the largest annual game jam in the world. I think it still is, but I haven't verified in several years. I've been to Nordic Game Jam ever since I started going in 2011, except like every year, except for 1 year, and technically this year because of the coronavirus, of course. So at Nordic Game Jam 2017, I was participating. To explain what a game jam is quickly, a game jam is an event where people gather together either online or in real life in some way to make games. There's some kind of a time limit. It can be long, it can be short. I think now that we are in a new decade, there's a decade game jam going where people make a game in 10 years and then have to present it at the end of the decade. So the time scale can be pretty long, but there's always some kind of a deadline as far as I know. The shortest deadline I know is a 0-hour game jam organized by my friend Sos, where you make a game during the switch from daylight savings in the autumn, or is it in the spring? I don't remember which way it goes. So after you have 1 hour to make a game, and after the jam ends, the kind of a daylight savings has changed. So actually the hour you just spent has disappeared. So you technically spend no time at all on the game. And in the Nordic Game Jam, you have a theme you have to follow, but only very loosely. The theme is more to give you ideas. It's less about kind of forcing you to adhere strictly to a specific idea, which I really appreciate. I enjoy it when these game jams are more about experimentation and trying ideas that come to your mind instead of like strict competition and very strict rules. And in 2017, the theme was not there. I was actually coming to the game jam with the idea that I would more just see my friends, because over the years I had made a lot of friends in Copenhagen where Nordic Game Jam is held. And I had existing projects that I felt some responsibility to those existing projects. And I thought that, well, maybe I'll see my friends, and if I get an idea, I'll do something for the game jam. But first and foremost, I will be there for the social experience, because it's an real life jam, there's a very unique atmosphere at those if the atmosphere is good. But when I heard the theme, I started thinking about how not the word works in logical operator or operations. How you can take some concept, for example, happy, and say not happy to reverse the meaning. Not has this kind of reversal. I don't really know about formal logic that much. Some much smarter people than me have taught me a little bit about it, but I'm still very unknowledgeable about that. But I still understand this basic concept of negation. And as mentioned, I had been playing these other block pushing games, and I had an interest in making my own block pushing game, or at least a puzzle game, for a long time. And these ideas from different puzzle games and this not their logic operator concept kind of bubbled in my head and gave me this mental concept of kind of a situation where you have a block pushing game where there's a pool of lava. The lava is obviously hot. Then you have blocks of ice. The ice is, well, it's ice, it's cold, it's meltable. And if the ice gets close to the lava, it melts. But you can say ice is not melt to remove this meltability from the ice. That's as far as I can remember. Obviously, it's been 3 years. I can't really remember the exact kind of thought process. I'm really sad I don't, because it would be really nice to be able to remember the exact details. Like what did I start with? What happened next? But, well, that's what I remember. And this kind of gave me this idea of, a block pushing game where you can make rules. There might be something there. I was really hesitant about this idea at first because, as mentioned, I was coming to Nordic Game Jam to work on other projects, not really make anything new. I was fairly certain that this idea wouldn't really make for a good puzzle game because I had trouble with puzzle games previously. My puzzle designs hadn't worked out super well, sometimes kind of well, but not in the perfect way that I had seen in some other puzzle games. And also I thought that because in Nordic Game Jam you have to make a game in 48 hours, you have only 2 days and you have to sleep, obviously. And also I wanted to be social. I didn't want to just be in front of the computer the entire event and be really unhealthy. I felt that I probably wouldn't have time to fix all the bugs or problems with this kind of design. But the really nice thing about game jams, and the reason why I like them so much, is that they cultivate, if they have a nice atmosphere and they don't kind of force you to be competitive or crunch or do some other unhealthy things, they can have this very unique atmosphere of letting you prototype an idea, letting you have it just in your leisure time, try out an idea you have in your head. If it doesn't work or if you get frustrated, you can throw it away and then you can just see what others are making or try to make something else or just walk around. You don't really have to commit too hard on this single idea. You can just see if it works. If it works, you might get excited and want to make something out of it. If it doesn't work, that's fine. After the game jam ends, you don't have to think about it anymore at all if you don't want to. So being in a game jam was a perfect excuse for me to prototype this idea, even though I was hesitant about it, and see if it works. And the game ended up being voted as the best game of the game jam. Nordic Game Jam is kind of, depending on who you ask, some people take it more seriously. They organize teams and try to kind of win the game jam. But the voting is very laid back and playful. So for me, it's definitely not a very competitive game jam. And I'm very happy about that. It works for my own approach. But I was still very happy about winning the game jam, so to speak, because it gave me encouragement that, hey, this idea has something to it. But still, after the game jam, I was very uncertain what to do with the game because, well, first of all, I had my existing projects. I still wasn't kind of entirely convinced that the idea would support a bigger game. Sometimes when you make a game for a game jam, it works really well in the constraints of the game jam. You make a really small thing, but it doesn't necessarily scale up into something larger, and you have to kind of decide, do I want to try to make this larger, or do I just say that, okay, this is a game jam game and that's fine, and leave it at that, make a small thing and be happy with it. So there were still some problems. that I had to resolve with the idea. But I got a lot of really positive feedback from other game developers at the game jam, and people kind of told me that, hey, this idea has a lot of potential. You should consider making a full game out of it. And also some people told me that they got philosophical ideas from this game, because in Baba is You, you have this you. You say Baba is you, or flag is you, or wall is you. You change who you control. And if you think about it in a philosophical way, you kind of change the nature of consciousness. You move a kind of consciousness around in the game. So some people got these philosophical ideas from the game and actually asked me if that was intentional. It definitely wasn't. I usually approach game design either very clearly story first or very clearly game mechanics first. And in Baba Is You, it was game mechanics first. So I didn't really consider these implications until people pointed them out. But I was really excited about these ideas, and I felt that, oh, maybe I could do something with this. Another problem was that I felt that I should make a decision if I make a full game, if I'm going to make a sandbox game, something where you play around with these words, you test them out and see what happens, or if I make a puzzle game. And if I make a puzzle game, I'd probably want to make a hardcore puzzle game, because some of the puzzle games I've enjoyed most have been fairly hardcore. So I thought I couldn't really bring together both this playful sandboxiness and this more hardcore puzzle design, at least not fully. So I would have to decide one or the other and concentrate on that. So there were a bunch of these considerations. The next slide will have a couple of more of these. I'll take a little sip of water. There we go. So so as I went forward, I had to, even though I had kind of realized that, okay, I will make a full game out of this. This seems too good to just like throw away. I had to decide on these very basic, very fundamental issues before I could really start planning what kind of a game it was. I ultimately planned to make decided to make a puzzle game purely because I enjoy puzzle games a lot. I felt that if I tried to make a sandbox game, it might be less the kind of game that I personally enjoy, so I might make a worse job about it. I might make a worse game in the end if I try to cater to an audience that I don't personally belong to as much. So that was a very, kind of a ultimately easy decision. And I kind of noticed that in many of these considerations, what I ultimately ended up deciding were the choices that let me work on the game most easily. For example, I worried about the graphics and the marketability of the game, and also the audio. I felt that, okay, this game idea is really good. Should I make very nice 3D or HD graphics to go with it to kind of maximize my chances of making the game kind of exciting for players, even for casual players who might not be interested in puzzle games? Or do I trust that the game idea is so good that I can make the graphics look like my own style, kind of, or make them personal and minimalistic and maybe less, how do I put it, kind of less marketable in a way. Same for the audio. Do I make the audio HD? Do I hire someone to do really cool orchestral soundtrack, or do I do it myself and decide that, okay, the quality will be lower, but at least it will look like me? And in all of these, because of the encouragement from my developer friends, and because of the victory at the Game Jam, and also because of some positive feedback for the Game Jam version that I put out for free, you can still find it on itch.io if you go looking for it. I kind of had some trust in the idea, so I ultimately decided that, okay, I will make a gamble. I will make the graphics myself, make them look more pixelated, maybe more or less marketable, more like my own style. I will do the audio myself. I hadn't really done music for games except for just a couple of times before, but I felt it was a really cool personal challenge. And even also there, I would choose the less marketable, more personal approach, and just hope that enough people would find the graphics and audio enjoyable, even if they were not, so to say, casually approachable. And the more people who might be more interested in a more marketable approach might still play the game because the idea is so strong. That was kind of my hope. And thus, I got to work on the game. One person actually contacted me early on about the story of the game, about these philosophical concepts, and offered to work with me to make kind of a story-driven game. Maybe not a story-driven game, but add a story to the game. And that was another consideration where I was slightly unsure what to do. Should I have a story in the game, or should I not have a story, do a more minimalistic thing? And ultimately, there too, I decided to do what felt more natural for me. And I decided to have this philosophical consideration in the game on some level, but do the story mostly without any kind of text, not do kind of an intentional story-driven thing, but more like a hints of a story. So then I got to work. I worked fairly quickly. It was a lot of fun to work on Baba Is You, the most fun I've ever had with a puzzle game. It helped that my previous commercial title had been a Metroidvania, which is kind of a non-linear thing where there's a lot of kind of a branching paths and so on. And Baba Is You was a very level-driven game. And also these words kind of gave me a lot of very funny concepts to work with. So making new levels was a lot of fun, and that kind of kept me going. I got a lot of motivation from trying to think of what kind of words do I add next? What kind of cool concepts do I have? How do I explore this idea as deeply as I can? So yeah, my original plan was maybe something like 40 or 60 levels. In the end, I ended up having more than 200 levels. And I'm actually working on an update that adds 200 more levels. So yeah, the idea turned out to be very lucrative for puzzles. And I'm really happy about that. It was so much fun to make these. Yeah. I think the idea is that I will look at the questions after the presentation. I'll try to get to the end so that I can actually answer as many questions as possible, because I really enjoy answering questions. So, I hope we can make that happen. So I kind of explained the level design process slightly earlier, but how I ended up doing things is what I called reverse engineering. It's a really bad word. It doesn't really explain the process at all, but I ended up using it for some reason, and I'll stick with it. So the level design process was that I considered the things I had, the words, the different mechanics that I had, basically the components in the game that I could make puzzles with. And I tried to think of interactions between those things. And I was, in my head usually, it turned out that it was very hard to make plans on paper for Baba Is You. So I kind of considered these different components in my head and tried to think of interactions that would be funny or amusing or exciting or cool in some way for me. And then when I found something that I thought would be cool, I tried to make a level where in order to beat the level, you have to see that interaction. You have to use that interaction. And the reverse engineering part was kind of that I started with the end point and then worked backwards from there, kind of what kind of structure do I have to have in the middle of this level so that in order to get to the end from the start, you have to use this interaction. To give a quick example, in the game, you have this word shift that makes something work like a conveyor belt. You can say belt is shift to make the belt object work like a conveyor belt. And I realized that what if you put two conveyor belts on top of each other? In real world, that doesn't really make sense. But in Baba Is You, the intuitive, the logical way of what would happen or logical thing would be that those belts would push each other at the same time. So you would get this kind of perpetuum mobile, I don't know, like infinite mover that moves forward every turn. And that seemed like something that is intuitive when you understand the game's logic, really unusual and thus exciting. And that was a very good example of this kind of interaction between things that is cool in some way, makes sense kind of, but is also requires this insight that I mentioned. And thus I try to make every puzzle require some kind of insight. I had learned this approach, this insight-based approach from games such as Snakebird and Stephen's Sausage Roll. Also, the game Braid, which is not a block pushing game, but a very influential puzzle game from, I think, 2008. So then I get to work. I spent almost exactly 2 years on the game. I entered it to the Independent Games Festival in 2018. I ended up winning the Design Award and the Best Student Game Award there. It was also showcased at, for example, Gamescom in Germany in 2018. And I got a lot of feedback and encouragement. I also showcased it to my game developer friends and set up a very active and kind testing team who gave me a lot of feedback. And Baba Is You was definitely created very largely from feedback from other players and people who saw it. At these events like Independent Games Festival and Gamescom, I got feedback from people who didn't maybe play as many puzzle games. And from game developer friends, I got more like a, so to say, professional game developer feedback. And all of this was very crucial because I wanted to explore this concept as deeply as possible. And I really needed outside perspective because it gave me ideas and inspiration of kind of what can I do with these concepts to explore them really deeply. And ultimately, I ended up collaborating with this Danish company MP2 Games to release the game on Nintendo Switch. And in April 2019, it was released on both Switch and Steam and Humble Store and itch.io. Finally, I will discuss very quickly about the reason why I think Baba Is You is exciting. So the first thing I kind of went into already, the game takes simplistic, understandable concepts like walls and rocks, pushable things. Many players understand the pushing block system because they have played Pokemon games or puzzle games and so on. And many people understand walls because we see walls every day. We see doors. We understand the goal flag concept. But in Baba Is You take these concepts and kind of change them around. Suddenly the wall can be the goal flag, or the wall can be you, the player, and that's exhilarating. That's entertaining and exciting for the player. It's cool in a way. And I think this is a very important point why people find Baba Is You's concept so exciting. And the second point kind of goes to the same topic, changing the meaning of familiar elements. Another thing that is maybe more exciting for those who play the game further, I was intended to release the game after just 1 year of development, but ended up spending an extra year. And during that year, I managed to figure out many ways of exploring the idea much more deeply. And also tester feedback let me figure out many much more interesting puzzles. Many of the most difficult puzzles were actually testers finding unintended solutions and me making those unintended solutions actually new puzzles. So I feel that for those who actually beat the game fully, the way the game explores the premise very deeply was an exciting thing. And also, even though I ended up making the game a kind of a hardcore puzzle game, the unintended solutions and the kind of sandboxiness of the idea still shines through, especially in the early levels, because players can, especially in the early levels, many of the unintended solutions are still there. So players can feel that they have been kind of toying with the idea. They have found insights the game didn't necessarily intend. Sorry. And the game is also getting a level editor. I'm aiming for a December 2020 release. Hopefully I can make that happen. And there will be online level sharing. So I hope that will also cultivate this kind of toying with the concept. And yeah, the final thing I mentioned already many times, the goal is to amuse and surprise the player. Thank you. That was my presentation. That was about 45 minutes. Do I have time to answer questions? Well, I will start. No, the creature's name, I'll just answer one question from the public chat, and then I will go to the questions and answers because there are a bunch of questions there. But Baba, the creature, is named after a very popular psychological experiment called Boba and Kiki effect. I recommend checking it up. It's interesting.
Hey, Arvi, you have plenty of time to answer the questions you want. Would you like me to push them to you, or do you want to just pick and choose as you go along? Everything is in the Q&A.
Should I answer the questions in the questions and answers first, or should I just look for questions in the public chat?
So I'll tell you what, let me just pick them in order from the bottom and send them to you. They'll appear on your screen and you can just answer as you go along. How about that? It'll be easier for you. So.
Sure.
Yeah, there we go. Can you see that?
Yep. So the question, how did you decide the difficulty for levels and progression? That was a very difficult process. I started up by just making more and more levels, and I didn't really consider the difficulty except on a very vague level at first. And when I had enough levels that I thought I could make a full game out of them, I started organizing the levels first based on theme, basically what words they used, so that levels that used the same words got kind of clumped together. And then I started within those clumps, I started organizing the levels kind of based on my hunch on difficulty and based on tester and player feedback on the difficulty, so that I kind of just try to estimate the difficulty as well as possible. And I actually programmed a small program that let me see all the levels on a map and let me kind of drag them with mouse together to form the different sub-maps. I think the end result didn't work perfectly in every situation, but I think one benefit or one strength of the system was that in Baba Is You have these sub-areas, and within these sub-areas, the difficulty actually, the curve increases independently of other areas. So the difficulty curve of the game increases as you play, but also it increases within every area. So if you go into the area that introduces a new word, there are also already kind of difficult levels and easy levels utilizing that specific word. And for some players, this is confusing because they want to beat every single area at once. So they might kind of play the very difficult levels in one area, then go into the next area and see very easy levels. But at least this let me have a situation where I can teach the words one by one for the player without them getting overwhelmed by constantly getting introduced to new words. And instead they can get overwhelmed about the difficulty. So, yeah, next.
Arvi, before we continue, why don't you you can stop sharing your screen so I can see you speaking.
Yeah, that's a very...
Sure. Yeah, there we go.
Yes. Okay. Okay. While designing the levels, did you try to bring new interactions after designing the levels, or did you decide every interaction and dedicated levels for it? That depended very heavily on the situation or when I said that I designed the level in a specific way, I'm of course lying in that there were many different happy accidents for the levels, and in many situations, a new level idea might come into my head very suddenly. Especially early on, I kind of simultaneously considered interactions between levels I had already implemented, or level ideas or words I had already implemented, and also ideas that I had in my head that I hadn't yet implemented. And also I kind of tried to consider when I had a word that I felt didn't have enough levels yet, I tried to think of, do I have any new word ideas that I could combine with this word to get more out of it? Sometimes I realized that, okay, this word actually doesn't support that many puzzle ideas, in my opinion. I won't include it in at all. I took out at least one word because of that. But sometimes I might run into a completely new, interesting word because of that. So I could kind of get more words and more puzzles in just by considering like what kind of a word would support this other word very well. And in some situations, I might also kind of be testing something and suddenly run into some odd interaction that I hadn't considered at all by accident and realize, oh, that's cool. I want to make a level out of that. And at least once I also suddenly realized that, hey, I'm making this level. Now that I'm looking at this, I can see this interaction that should work. And then I try it and it doesn't work. And then I actually have to fix bugs because there's an interaction I hadn't even realized it was there that I hadn't kind of accounted for. I hope that answers the question. Since you agreed to worry a lot about marketability about your games, what decisions you had to make in the game which make sense design-wise but were marketable? Yeah. Okay. So as mentioned, the most important things were the audio and the graphics, because the game's graphics are pixelated, which I think nowadays people are fairly accepting of pixelated graphics. But I know that there's a lot of people who find those kind of retro styled and thus less interesting. I feel that if you make your games have HD graphics or 3D graphics, at least if you have some sense of good taste to the design, obviously you can make bad looking HD graphics or bad looking 3D graphics. But I would say that on the baseline, you would still have a better chance of making people notice a game if it has nice HD graphics than if it has very nice pixel graphics. I might be wrong, but that's my hunch. So choosing to go with pixelated graphics and this kind of a very minimalistic, childish looking design, in my opinion, felt like a gamble. And also with the audio, both that I didn't go with a very skilled composer, but also that I went with a very bad composer, which is myself. I'm not a good composer. It was a very exciting learning opportunity, and I think I managed pretty okay. I'm happy about the results. I don't think the music in Baba Is You is bad music, but it was still made by an amateur. So it was, again, a very big gamble. Also, handling business kind of relations, PR, answering all the business emails on my own, having my own company, running my own company, making all the trailers and marketing materials on my own for the most part. All of those were decisions that I made partially because of laziness and partially because of this desire to do things on my own. And actually, one lesson for all of you, if you are planning to release your own game, if it seems that your game is going to be popular, hire someone to answer or handle some emails for you. Over the first year after Baba Is You's release, I think I answered about 1,800 business emails on my own, and you will get tired. I was very tired at some points in 2019 because I just answered so many emails. It's unhealthy. Could you talk a bit about your playtesting process? How do you test your levels for those inside moments? Well, basically, I make a level where I have a specific intention about how the level should work. I have a specific goal in mind. Then I put that level into the game, usually with a couple of other levels. So it's not just like, hey, here's a new test version, there's one more level, but here's a new test version, I'm testing 5 new levels. And then I send it to testers. Early on, the testers were my game developer friends. I just sent it kind of, hey, if any of you have time, could you check this out and play it? And because Baba Is You was kind of exciting, I feel that I got a lot of very kind feedback from game developer friends. And later on, well, obviously I showcased the game at events, but I couldn't really have like a structured feedback format at like a show floor. But still, I got like in real life feedback from people actually playing the game. Mostly, I didn't utilize people like recording themselves playing. One playtester did that, and it was useful. But it seemed like because people were testing the game for free, I felt that it would have been rude to really ask them to spend that much effort to test my game. But later on, maybe about half a year or slightly longer before the game's release, I set up a Discord where I picked some people who had been very active in my kind of a fan community or among the game developer testers and just asked, hey, do you want to test this game? Basically people that I trusted on some level that I thought might not like leak any files and stuff. I asked them, would you want to become part of the testing team, and set up the Discord? And in the Discord, even now that I've been working on the level editor update and new levels, I've been making new versions, putting them on the Discord and hey, there's a new level or there's a new update, and I added new levels. And because of this reverse engineering approach, many of my levels have a lot of unintended solutions. And well, yesterday I got at least 2 messages, I think, in the Discord, one and today one, of a tester being like, hey, I checked out this new level you made. You can solve this level without using any of the important parts. You can completely break the level. And then I'm just, well, of course, that happens every single time. And sometime today or tomorrow, I will have to return to the level, look at the level, and try to understand what I was thinking when I made the level and fix those unintended solutions that I don't want to be there and hope that they work. Usually what happens is that I fix them, I send a new version, the testers say, you can still break the level in a different way, and I have to consider it again. And then eventually I either remove the level because it has become too complicated, or I just say that I maybe figure out a way to actually remove all the unwanted, unintended solutions, or just cry and give up. Since most puzzles are based around quirky wordplay, did you face any problems to convey the mechanic in other languages? Yes, absolutely. We considered the possibility of fully translating the game, fully localizing everything, but fairly soon we realized that that wouldn't be possible, at least not in every language. And I felt that if we could offer full localization on some languages, but not in all languages, it would feel kind of odd, even though it would also be kind of nice, but it felt kind of bad. And in many languages, for example, there are gendered nouns, like different objects have their own genders, and you have to take those into account when making sentences. So, for example, Spanish turned out to be a very difficult language to localize to if we tried to localize the word as well. We would have had to make it so that the words actually change when depending on context, and that would have made it kind of difficult. It would have required a lot of work. And another consideration is that, for example, the sentence "Baba is you" in itself is already grammatically incorrect, of course. It doesn't make sense in English, but English is such a flexible, such a muddy language that you can still understand what it means. So we would have had to work with a team of translators who understand really well the slang of, for example, Spanish and English. They understand both languages very well, so they can understand what kind of grammatical errors we can intentionally make so that people can still understand what we are saying, but it doesn't sound really silly. How we can kind of implement the Baba is you system in other languages. Another problem was the word not, which appears in the game. You can say not Baba is you or Baba is not you, and so on. You can use the same word in multiple different places, but in many languages, it's not that simple. Many languages have much stricter word order rules than English. For example, Swedish or, again, Spanish. And we discussed very extensively with some translators and just realized that, we can't just have a single word not for all those situations, or at least it would have to change a lot depending on where it's put in the rules. So ultimately we decided that, okay, we will translate just the user interface. And it's a shame, but I think it would have taken years to get as many translations. Like we might have 1 or 2 localizations at this point, especially because I was so tired in 2019 after all those business emails that kind of slowed things down even more. That is an undefined question.
Did the text not appear?
The text was undefined. So.
Oh, I'll read it out to you. This one came from Sanam. They said, I find designing puzzle games is harder than other puzzle types. Can you shed some light on how you keep your creativity running during that time? Any suggestions on how to get inspiration for new puzzles?
So I explained some of my inspirations. One of them is definitely this kind of brainstorming approach of taking the components you have and smashing them together, both in your head and also in the game. In Baba Is You, even in the original game jam version, I made a level editor that was very easy to access. I had to press only one button when I started the game to access the level editor, so I could test out ideas very quickly. So trying out what happens when you combine different things can be very important because it can give you ideas. Even if you don't find what you're looking for, even if the idea you were testing doesn't work out, you can still find something else that looks interesting. Another thing is taking breaks, doing other things. When you are making a puzzle game, you have to do the user interface. I had to work on the level editor. I had to work on the music. Working on something else for some time lets you see the levels with fresh eyes, which can give you ideas. Taking your time. As mentioned, I plan to work only 1 year on Baba Is You. But because I worked 2 years in Baba Is You, I had the time to come up with some really cool new things. For example, the word level, which lets you say, for example, level is push or level is stop, so that the whole level is something. And that was a really exciting new thing that I wanted to include in the game. And I wouldn't have had the time to come up with that idea if I had spent only 1 year on the game. So this is, of course, kind of a sad thing to say, because usually you don't really, like if you're on a budget and you're working on a commercial title, you don't have forever to wait for those perfect ideas. But unfortunately for me, I've run multiple times into situations where I have had a design problem or just a motivational problem. I haven't really known how to go forward with an idea because I just don't feel it. And then I spent a couple of months not thinking about it or being scared about it. And then I get an idea, either because of like random stuff I'm discussing with testers or other game designers or something I see in another game, or I just ponder on the idea without really thinking about it. And then it strikes me that, hey, yeah, that's maybe a good idea. Maybe it actually doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, then it can be really disheartening. But if it works, then suddenly you have solved the problem. And that's really nice. But of course, sometimes you just have to go with what you have and hope for the best. You don't have the time to ponder forever.
We have time for one last question, Arvi. But before we do, folks, we're putting out a link to a small survey, please. At the end of this talk, please fill it up. It takes about 1 second. It's just one question. It helps us make great talks like this for you and get amazing speakers like Arvi to come back. Okay, so let's go through the questions. I think there's one at the top that somebody asked. Yeah, okay, this is from Chirag. I'll just push it to you.
Okay. I see you updated the frame with the level editor. How did you cope with the cold start for the same? How did you deal with no user-made levels when you rolled the update? As in face this problem. So, sorry, I read that kind of quickly because I noticed that the questions go away, so I was afraid of missing something. So the question was basically how to cope with implementing a level editor without having user-made levels, and just kind of how to cope with the implementation of a level editor. So, as mentioned, I started working on a level editor already at the very start because the program I use, called Multimedia Fusion, it has its own system for making your own levels, but that system is very limited. So I've kind of learned over the years to usually make my own level editor for almost every game I make, because that's eventually faster and it saves me a lot of trouble down the line. So it was a very natural choice for me to just make my own level editor for Baba Is You, even when I didn't really realize that I would be making a full game out of it. But that turned out to be a very good idea, because when I started working on a full game, as mentioned earlier, it allowed me to prototype ideas very quickly, but it also allowed me to kind of start building an official level editor very early on. So even during the original release process, I was working on a full level editor, both for my own use so that I could have an easier time making the game, but also for people to find. So when the game came out in April 2019, there was kind of a hidden level editor in the game for people to find who knew how to edit some Lua files. It was a very easy thing to enable. And when we ported the game to C++, I asked the porting company to do some basic work so that the level editor works on some level. So even before the level editor became kind of officially available, it's still not officially available, but if you have the game on Steam, you can opt in for free in the beta branch called beta test. Right-click the game on Steam, go to properties and betas, and select beta test on the drop-down list, and you can actually get access to the beta version of the level editor, like if you want. So even before I started kind of officially working on the level editor and made the official update that we are doing that, people who wanted could very easily enable the level editor and make their own levels. So for the past year or so, or 1.5 years at least, I've been getting a lot of kind of feedback and suggestions and very cool levels made by the community of those people who kind of found the level editor and made their own stuff. For example, people have made Conway's Game of Life and Minesweeper and Snake in Baba Is You. And that's super cool. I'm so happy that people have actually embraced the BabaISU as a programming language, so to say. And I'm really excited to see what people make with the level editor. And also for the level editor, I basically only need feedback from people in terms of the user interface. When we release the level sharing, we need to get, obviously, feedback on the level sharing. But right now, when the level sharing is still kind of unreleased, it's enough that I get feedback from people on kind of how nice the user experience is. And that was an answer to the question. But as a final thing, I noticed that there were a bunch of questions that I didn't have time to answer. So if you are still interested in asking me about these things, do send me questions on Twitter or by email or on Discord. I'm happy to answer any questions about BabaISU. So don't hesitate to kind of approach me, as long as you are not asking very difficult questions. I will tell you if the question is difficult. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm so happy that that you were interested in having me talk about BabaISU. It was a lot of fun. And sorry about all the problems in the beginning.
Arvi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us for this. I think everyone is very excited to have had you. We're grateful you made the time. You've opened the floodgates. Everyone's going to be barraging you with questions henceforth. But all right, guys, I can see a big round of likes coming for Arvi. So thank you so much. And I hope we have you down at IGDC in person sometime.
All right. That would be really cool. Yeah. Thank you very much. And have a great day and rest of the event.
We'll see you backstage, Arvi.
Okay.